So along the lines of taking imperfect action, I wanted to record this first video. And as a reminder to anyone that's watching it, that there never is a perfect time, a perfect day, a perfect background, or a perfect situation for recording these. And so hopefully that's an inspiration for you. I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey as a reminder to everyone watching that no one's journey is linear. And hopefully this will be an inspiration for you to not be so hard on yourself. So there's a vivid memory that comes to mind when I think about my past life in corporate America. I was dressed in a business suit on a Monday morning and I was pushing an ATM on a sidewalk in Brooklyn with my boss by my side. The funny part about it is just like now, I had a smile on my face because I was really convinced that I had made it. If I think back to that time, I don't know that I really had a clear idea of what a perfect job or making it would be. For anyone that's been following me on social, you'll know that I've had shiny object syndrome for as long as I can remember. And I would say that applied to my job selection as well. So I would say my career began in earnest when I found a job that I applied for in the New York Times, the print version of the New York Times, which took me down to downtown New York City. I applied, I was accepted, and prior to starting the position, I had to take a month-long training program to become a teller. It was interesting. When I first started my job that first day, I had to wear a suit to work, or I think I chose to wear a suit to work. I didn't have to. But it's funny when you look back at those moments that showing up that day in that suit for me was a sign to myself that I had made it. I was always looking to do the best that I could. And it was during one of those drives by the bank, this idea of knowing your customer, that we were asked to greet customers by name whenever possible. And my original idea was to write the names of the customers on a note and compare it to the name on their check so that when they would come to the window, I would see their name and I would be able to say their name back to them. So when Susie from Empire Clothes would come and present her check, I would say, "Hey, Susie, welcome back. Nice to see you today." One day, the bank manager was in the teller area getting to know more of the tellers on a personal level. And he came over to my window and he saw this list of paper that I had scribbled with the names of companies and the first names of the people who would come to the window. Naturally, it was a head scratching moment for him because he was thinking, what is this guy doing? Is there some sort of fraud going on? And I had to explain to him the logic of the program and how I went about making sure that I would remember these folks' names. And he was so impressed with my approach that over the next couple of weeks, we had a couple of conversations and he was convinced that I was ready to be moved onto the main sales floor. It was the first of many opportunities that came from what I like to call my corporate godfather, and I'll be forever grateful to having met him and for all the doors he's opened for me during my time at the bank. About a year in, he had informed me that he was actually leaving the branch to go work at a new program where they were installing check cashing services in banks that didn't have a lot of traffic. So those one or two windows that you would see at the end of the bank that were unused, they were creating this new program. And the company, Chase at the time, partnered with a software company in California, which had developed this fancy software. At the time, it seemed fancy. It was a camera with a gooseneck. It was an ATM on the teller side, and it would dispense cash once the client would scan their check. So it was essentially a check cashing service within the branch. It became very popular, and it was my first job in this position as operations. So essentially, I had to write an operations manual from scratch, which I had never done before. But what was interesting at the time is that my boss had faith in me. We ended up implementing this service in multiple branches throughout all the 5 boroughs, Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn, as I mentioned when I started this story. And there we were with our suits pushing this empty ATM. At the time, in retrospect, it probably would make sense to remind people who were around us that it was empty, but I knew it was, but the people outside watching us probably didn't know that. What had happened is the company that had delivered the machine could only drop it off at the front entrance. And so we had to get it to the back to wheel it into the bank so that it would be ready for day one when the doors opened. Looking back, it's one of those interesting moments when you wonder what you were thinking, but it's something that's certainly memorable and stood out for me. So fast forward, my corporate godfather moved on to a better position, and I end up taking a job at a new department in the bank testing software. Given my proclivity for computers, I was once again able to learn on the job. What you'll notice as a trend is not having the subject matter expertise in the job I was about to take, but realizing that I knew enough and I could think on the job and in the moment enough to learn as I went. So now we are in mid 1999 and the dot-com craze had taken off full speed. It was wildly fascinating. It feels like millionaires were being minted overnight. And my friend introduced me to a scrappy entrepreneur who was starting a portal aimed at Latino culture. Given my roots, born in El Salvador, I was definitely down. He called it Latino. It's Latiknow, and I still give him grief to this day because in his mind it was Latino, Know, which unfortunately proved challenging to convince folks it wasn't pronounced Latik now. And we gave it our best shot, but weren't able to catch that dot-com wave. So there I was. I had left my job. I had taken an unpaid position with my friend, and things weren't working. I had no salary and I was running out of savings. I ended up getting a job as a waiter at age 30. And while that was a humbling experience in and of itself, because the last time I was a waiter previous to that was when I was 17, working at Fridays in downtown Manhattan, which was very fun, a lot of memories of that. But back at 30, it was humbling to say the least. But it was also a feeling of doing what needed to get done. In hindsight, again, it was one of the most fun times I can remember. If you haven't worked in the service industry, there's nothing like the camaraderie of working long shifts and sharing beers and evenings after work with your crew. It's really, really fun. So what happened is over the course of the next few months, I would continue to have lunch with my corporate godfather, and eventually a new opportunity came up at Chase's new smart card division. I remember him clearly asking me if I had any project management experience, and while I don't remember what I specifically said at the time, I'm pretty sure that I said that I did or that I knew a little bit. And to be honest, I was really lying because I really didn't have much practical experience. I remember getting the job and then making my way to Barnes and Noble at the time and buying 3 books on project management. And that's an important skill I still use to this day. Eventually, that job led to another job in the corporate card division where I understood the basics, but I was a quick learner and soon found myself as an implementation manager, and I would travel around the country setting up these new corporate card programs. That bug, that entrepreneurial bug of what's next, that shiny object syndrome was always in effect. And less than a year later, I reconnected with my half-brother in Atlanta who had just gotten remarried. I ended up going to visit him and learning what he had been up to since leaving New York several years earlier. He himself was a self-starter. He had begun as a laborer working on siding crews and eventually worked his way up to starting his own crew, and that led him to starting a vinyl siding company. And by the time we were reunited, he had expanded the business to masonry as well. To be honest, things were going well for me in New York, but the entrepreneurial whisperer was always there begging to be heard. And we stayed in touch. And over the course of the next few months and one more trip back to Atlanta, he convinced me to go down there and become his general manager. Needless to say, it's no surprise. And if you've made it this far, you'll know that there's not much that I knew about the construction business when I went down there. It was after making that decision and breaking the news to my corporate godfather that I experienced the tragedy of 9/11 from my apartment in the East Village. There's a lot to say about my experience of that event and how it shaped and affected me, but I'll probably leave that for a future video. Needless to say, it was a unique experience for me as a New Yorker. My office at Chase was 3 blocks away from the Twin Towers, and it was a surreal few weeks to say the least. And while I was emotionally connected to New York, which I'll always consider home, I knew it was time for me to go on my next adventure in Atlanta. It was an intense learning experience, and within a few months I was well versed in blueprint estimates and accurately bidding on and winning several projects for the company. I would find myself awakened by the sound of a Nextel chirp, a common handset in construction. And it was a wild and fun 2 years, but as things tend to go in the construction industry and family businesses, I realized it was clearly time to move on. It was December 2023, and I found myself sitting on a plane staring out the window on a Delta flight back to go live with my parents. It was a humbling moment. And what's interesting, what I've discovered is that life has a way of humbling you, and it's not easy to talk about sometimes, especially now as I sit here in front of a camera talking to you. One highlight was that earlier in the year, I had connected with a friend I had met years ago in Amsterdam. So come late December, I ended up on a 26-hour trip to the island of Koh Samui to welcome in 2024. There's a longer story about how I almost died on that trip, which I've shared on a few stages, but I'll just leave it there for now and I'll pick it up in a future video. When I was back in New York, it took a few more months and a few more lunches with my corporate godfather before a new opportunity presented itself, and I was now working in E-Trade And my role was helping to implement business intelligence software known as business objects. Again, no surprise. I knew nothing about the software, but a few weeks later, I found myself in a Midtown Manhattan office reporting for my first day of work. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, and I tell you this long-winded story to remind you that not everyone's journey is linear. And as cliche as it sounds, you can't always make sense of the pieces looking forward. It's only when you look back and look how things ended up that you appreciate taking those crazy leaps into the unknown, which would eventually become your life. I learned so much and would force myself into situations where I had to figure things out on the spot. And it's a valuable skill that has served me in my entrepreneurial journey and a reminder that you don't have to figure it out all yourself. There's a couple of ideas and stories in this video, and it's my first attempt at being on camera. So I thought it'd be helpful to articulate what's currently happening for me and what prompted it. First and foremost, I feel compelled to share my experiences in the hopes that I can inspire folks of all ages. And maybe this is the prompt that you need. This is the inspiration that you were waiting for. Maybe you see yourself in me and my varied career journey, and you could be at the very beginning, the middle, or even the closing end of yours. It's okay. Acknowledge where you are and give yourself some space. The origin for this video came from a post I made on my website, and it's something that put me out of my comfort zone. And so this next step of me recording this is continuing to do that, to push myself out of my comfort zone. I feel that if you do the same things over and over and over again, sometimes for me across decades, and you expect to get a different result, it's been described as the definition of insanity. So as of this recording, I'm 52 years old, and I'm starting this new journey of exposing myself out as a creator and expressing some ideas that I've been holding on to for a long time. I'm doing it to demonstrate to myself and then to others that I'm capable of change. And it's not that I don't have the proper inspiration and not for lack of trying, sometimes half-heartedly, but I feel now is the time to put that all into action. So my goal is to flex first my writing muscle and then my comfort level with appearing on camera. So what'll happen is I'm taking the content that I'm writing in the newsletter and letting that sit on my website and circulating that. That goes published out every Saturday. And then I'm beginning to take some of those videos, and this is the first one, and recording here on YouTube, which is something that's brand new for me. My expectation is that through my ongoing commitment to consistency, I'll fuel the skill and transfer it to other areas of my life, my health, my relationship, my family, my nutrition, my business, and other areas that I can't even see at this moment. It's in the world of podcasting where I first learned this idea of know, like, and trust. And it's something that I remind clients of and students as we begin our podcasting journey together. My journey is no different. And while I've had an online presence since 2014 with my two shows, Podcast Junkies and Vertical Farming Podcast, my written content and my YouTube content has been very, very sparse, to say the least. That changes with the publication of this video, and it's slowly started to make waves as I've been publishing these online for the past few months. I feel like if I'm to continue to build relationships and grow my business and network, I have a responsibility to teach others what I've learned along the way. I've come to be humbly reminded that no matter what I say, if I'm not willing and able to be honest about my ups and downs, how can I possibly expect you to relate? So this is the part where you get to know me. The origins of this video come from the newsletter, like I've said, and that has been inspired by someone by the name of Dan Coe, who I found in mid-2022. And upon finding his content, it was like a light bulb went off. I went back, started consuming all his online content, all his YouTube videos, and it's been really inspiring to see what's possible as a solopreneur. The main takeaway from his content, which resonates really, really strongly with me, is this idea that we're all brought here in this lifetime with these experiences to not only have them, but to share our lessons. And in this way, we do our part to raise the consciousness of this planet. I'm going to give you a little inside baseball here. If you see my eyes darting from the camera to you and then to somewhere a little below you, it's because I'm reading this off from the newsletter itself, which I'll then edit in Descript, which is a great app. I'll talk about that later. But I want to be as transparent as possible. And a reminder to you, again, take imperfect action. So I'm reading this as I go, and I'll edit it later. So that'll explain that in case that's somewhat distracting for you. So I want you to have the full picture. Related to this idea of exposing myself, I've also come out of the spiritual closet, as I'd like to say. I've been on a spiritual journey for almost 20 years, and this concept resonates with me very, very powerfully. This idea of sharing your experiences, raising the consciousness of this planet. So that's my message to you today in this video. Remember that every single one of you watching this has a voice inside of you, and that voice is a vibration. a story waiting to be told. You'll find as you begin to share this story just how cathartic that experience will be. And you will be that beacon, that inspiration for just one person who needs to see this message at the right time. That person is you, my friend. I can tell you that I already feel different than I did when I first started this video because my hope is to inspire you to do the same. And it's going to be messy, and that's okay. I encourage you to follow nature's examples of the beauty of imperfections. Rocks aren't made perfectly round, and trees don't grow in a straight line, and there's a reason for that. Your journey is the same. It's wildly beautiful and imperfect, and now's the time to share it. Don't wait 30 years like I did.